Welcome, good afternoon. I'm Michael Pusillo, Chair of the Palm Beach Civic Association, and it's our pleasure to have you here today for this speaker series for the Civic Association. Our two guest speakers today are both expert financial investors. We look forward to hearing their comments. Ken Langone is a prominent businessman who organized the financing for the founders of the Home Depot retail chain that we all know. Jon Harris is CEO and founder of alternative investment management known as AIM 13. Mr. Harris will conduct the interview of Mr. Langone today, and the focus of the conversation today will be generational investing, does it change, or do the core principles remain the same? It should be an interesting and informative discussion. Normally, I also, at this point in time, introduce our town council and mayor, but we don't have any of them here today, so we won't do that. But I do want to recognize Northern Trust, who is our sponsor for today's luncheon. I believe we have Chris Storkison here, do we? There we are. Chris, Senior Vice President and Senior Wealth Strategist at Northern Trust, and he's representing Northern Trust today. Christopher is Chairman of the town's Investment Advisory Committee, and I'm pleased to say he's been a Civic Association Director since 2013. And Christopher, we'd like to have you just give a few remarks to us, to our group today. And thank you again for your sponsorship.
Just a couple remarks, not too long. Just wanted to say good morning to everyone and thank you on behalf of Northern Trust and the members of our team, Lisa Koza, who's the Managing Director, who's here, Betsy Turner, who many people know, and Seth Thompson are here as portfolio managers and advisors. We have Cheryl Culp on the banking side. She's the one who has the money that most people want. And Darlene Zuba, who's the trust advisor, and she deals with me a lot in the dynamics of dysfunctional families, which we're really good at as well. Anyway, we want to thank the Palm Beach Civic Association for all that you do. And I think this term is incredibly important, not only for the Civic Association, but for Northern Trust and the conversation today, to protect the quality of life. Protect the quality of life in this town. I've lived and worked at Northern Trust here in Palm Beach for the last 20 years. I became a Civic Association, thank you for stealing my thunder, in 2013, and I was introduced by my father-in-law, Brian Burns, who was close with Ken Langone, and Jon Harris's father, Ira, who I got to know very well as well and worked on many boards with. My extended family is embedded in this community. Some would argue that's a good thing, others may not, depending on what time of day it is, but I have a lot of family members around here in terms of GoGo, for those who you know GoGo. That itself is a second-time job. One of my sons is returning to Palm Beach after growing up here and going to school here and starting his career. So protecting the quality of life is incredibly important to me personally. As Northern Trust is a highly regarded trust company, the concept of generational wealth and protecting the quality of life is very embedded in our DNA. This includes, and this may cause some agita, so I apologize, but clients who are concerned about how best to pass their assets without the negatively impacting future generations, how to financially protect their spouses and family members from the complications, I won't go too far into what those are, but what we all have known what those can mean, in the world around us. Many times I view myself more of as a financial therapist than anything else. Hot topics in the world around us now include asset protection, family dynamics, health, education, philanthropy, fear of outliving financial assets, beneficiaries who are productive and members of society, family businesses and private assets, and the complexity of the world, and how do you pass that from one generation to the next with the greatest intent of keeping our families happy and healthy and without destroying motivation. So again, I just want to thank the Civic Association and members of this community for being part of this today, and thank you for all that you do in this community and caring about this, because in many ways we are the guardians at the gate, keeping the barbarians out. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Mary Robinson, the CEO of the Palm Beach Civic Association, and it is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our speakers, Ken Langone and Jon Harris. And yes. And as we certainly know, Mr. Harris is Chief Executive Officer of AIM 13, a New York-based privately owned investment firm with $1.5 billion in assets under management.
That may be a little bit less after the last week. So.
The firm specializes in alternative assets, including private equity, hedge funds, and direct investments. And Jon Harris is chair of AIM 13's investment committee and board of managers. He leads the firm's investment management activities and its overall strategic direction. And before joining AIM 13, Jon managed private investments for J. Ira Harris Associates, and that is certainly a name that we in this community recognize, the late, great Ira Harris. And Ira's lovely wife, Nikki, is here today, Civic Association Director Nikki Harris. And I have to say, we need to give Nikki credit for today's program, because when our chairman, Michael Pusillo, asked me, he said, let's see if we can get Ken Langone to speak. So it was in the summertime, and I reached out to Ken by email. It was in June, and I purposely selected a Thursday, because I think to make an ask, I always try to stay away from a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. I was hoping Ken was maybe playing golf, having a nice round, having a nice lunch. So I sent the email around 10 in the morning, and I thought, hopefully I'll hear back from him around 4, and sure enough, I did. I heard from Ken at 4 o'clock. He said, I'm in if Jon Harris is in. So I wrote back to Ken, I'll call Nikki, Jon's mother. So, Jon, full disclosure, I never did call you, but when I called your mother, Nikki's words to me were, I'll call him right now. And then I heard right back from Nikki. She said, he'll be there. So.
And I answered immediately, as a good son should. No matter if you're 55, you still do it. So.
Yeah, I love that story, though. And so, Nikki, again, it's so wonderful to have you here, and certainly all that you and Ira did over the decades for our community, and also Bill Brooks Award recipients. Now to have your son Jon here speaking, carrying the torch, it means a great deal to us. And also certainly to have Ken Langone. And Ken Langone, as we certainly know, is a highly successful entrepreneur and the founder and chairman of Invemed Associates, a New York-based venture capital and investment banking firm. And through Invemed, Ken played a pivotal role in financing startups, co-founding the Home Depot, along with 2 other individuals in 1978. Today, the Home Depot is the largest home improvement retailer in the United States, with more than 2,300 stores across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and approximately 475,000 associates. In the fiscal year 2024, the company generated nearly $160 billion in sales, with net earnings of nearly $15 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the Civic Association's great pleasure to give you Ken Langone and Jon Harris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My apology, I originally had a date to be here in January, but unfortunately we had a death effectively in the family, and I had to be at the funeral. But here I am. I said I'd show up. Here I am.
Well, I am absolutely thrilled to be here. And somebody said, "Are you nervous about having to interview Ken and in front of the Civic Association?" I said, "I'm nervous." I said, "But it's your mother is the toughest critic." So hopefully I get a good grade today. But just absolutely thrilled, and just was absolutely blessed and fortunate, and to be able to do this here today, because I know how much the Civic Association meant to my father. So it's a true honor, and appreciate being here. I got to meet Ken about 30 years ago, 1996, August in San Diego. I was working for Jack Kemp, who was running for vice president, and Ken was a big supporter. And he would say to me, let's go out, we're going for a run, which really meant we were going out kind of for a fast walk. And the reason he was bringing me was that he didn't want to have to talk, and so he just asked me questions. And I kept saying, who is this? Who is this? And I did not realize what a turning point that was going to be in my life, because Ken has been a true mentor, friend, and role model, whether you're talking about in family, in business, or in philanthropy. So it's a true honor to be here.
Thank you very much.
We were given a topic, which, of course, when you give Ken sort of boundaries or guidelines, he says, okay, we'll do this, this, this. And so we may go in a number of different directions today. But Ken, I thought just maybe if you could start with, you grew up in Long Island to two parents who valued hard work, faith, and always doing the right thing. Your mom worked in the school cafeteria. Your father was a plumber, and discipline and core values were always important. You then attended Bucknell, where you worked a number of jobs, including ditch digging, selling products door to door, and working construction. Can you maybe just share some of the experiences that you go back to that you think really shaped who you are and who you've been, and how you've lived your career and your philanthropy, and what those experiences early on and how they impacted you?
Before that, I want to say, and I wasn't put up to this by John, we've been an original investor with AIM from the day they started, and we haven't taken a nickel out, and we've done very, very, very well. He didn't ask me to make the pitch, but I'm telling you right now. There you go. There you go. I'm a salesman. What can I tell you? I mean, I was raised in what I considered to be, looking back on my life, an ideal environment. Why it was ideal was the one thing I knew, I had my mother and father's love, unconditionally. As bad as I might be, I think if I had a nickel every time my father would say to me, if I never see you again, it'll be too soon. When he was mad at me, and 5 minutes later, he's hugging me and kissing me. And we were typically in a typical Italian family where you express your emotions. And my parents both had to work because it was tough. I think I started to become aware of money when I was about 7 or 8 years old, when I helped my brother with his paper out. It was then Newsday. It was a very young newspaper then. And I used to fold them, and he used to throw them on the stoop or the porch of the house. And of all the different things I did, I'll tell you one story that has impacted my sense of obligation. One of the jobs I had, I worked in a butcher shop from 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock every day, and then I'd go out for whatever sport I was involved in. It was right near the high school. And there was sawdust, like in the butcher shops used to have sawdust, and my job was to go rake the sawdust and anything that should not be in there, get it out. And next door, there was a liquor store. And the owner was Lenny Altman, a wonderful man, and one day he came to me and said that he'd just been notified that the garbage company that was collecting the trash would no longer come to the back of the store for the empty boxes that the liquor came in. And would I be willing to work 2 nights a week to bring the boxes out to where they'd pick them up? I said, sure. And he said, I'll pay you $2 a week, $1 a night. And one day I'm bringing the boxes out, and there's a fellow on the truck breaking the boxes up. I said, what are you doing? He said, I make a lot of money selling this cardboard. And I said, how do you do that? He said, we've got a place over here, you bring it over, they weigh it, and they give you so much. And I think this is where my entrepreneurship started to blossom. I went to Lenny, and I said to Lenny, I wanted to make a deal with him. I didn't want the $2 anymore. I figured I could make more selling the cardboard. I said, I don't want the money anymore. I want to just be all right that if I can store the broken up boxes for 2 days in between the collection? He said, that's fine. Fast forward 5 years. And I'm walking by the liquor store one day. He always stood outside, and this is a very little town, Roslyn Heights. You blink your eyes, you'd miss the whole downtown. And he said, hey, you going to college? And I said, yes, I am. He said, come on in. I went with him to he had a little wall, a cash register on this side, and his little office in the back. And we go around the back end of the office, and he pulls open the desk drawer, and he takes out an envelope. And he said, I understand you're going to college. He said, I hope this helps. He had put the $2, I can cry, he put the $2 every week in an envelope. And that was what the envelope was all about. And that was my first real understanding of philanthropy. It was very personal. And it impacted me for the good. But I always, I always had a buck in my pocket. I sold stationery at Bucknell to the kids, the incoming freshmen. By the way, you had to know the tricks of the trade. When I was selling stationery, you had to get the kid. Bucknell used to have orientation week, the first week, and you had to get those kids that week because they're homesick and they're lonely and they haven't made any new friends yet. And so you go into their room and you sit down with them and you say, okay, how many friends do you have you're going to write letters to? 5. How many times a week? Twice. Well, this means you need this many envelopes, you need this much letters, paper. Now, and I always collected the money when I got the order, because within a week they'd made new friends, they'd forgotten their friends, and they never needed the stationery, but they were getting it. I used to stop at Tie City on Times Square and buy neckties for $1 a piece. We used to all wear, back then the rage was rep ties, striped ties. And I used to sell them, take them up to Bucknell, sell them for $1.50 a piece. And when you don't have any money, you got to figure ways to make it. And so I was always a bit of an entrepreneur, and I had fun doing it.
Well, so after Bucknell, you made your way into the finance world. And you started off, but you transferred to LF Rothschild, which is where
No, R.W. Pressbridge.
From R.W. to Rothschild.
No, I didn't go to Rothschild.
Oh, okay.
I stayed at Pressbridge until I left in '74 to start Invemed.
So the EDS for
Yeah.
Ross Perot.
1968.
And maybe if you could just talk a little bit about that deal. And that was a deal that you talk about how close the guys were to bankruptcy, how difficult it was to raise, or excuse me, we'll go to that deal next. But maybe if you could talk about following up EDS,
Sure.
You ended up doing the Home Depot deal.
Right. Well, what happened was in 1968, spring of '68, without exaggeration, EDS was the equivalent of Amazon. It was the most sought after piece of business in Wall Street. Every firm in Wall Street wanted it. Now, R.W. Pressbridge was a teeny-weeny firm that specialized in trading railroad bonds. And they'd never done a deal like this ever before. And I found out, in fact, I'll tell you who told me about it. I was having dinner the Saturday night before Lent began in 1968, and I was seated next to a man who some of you may remember, Jack Haidt. Jack Haidt worked for Ross. He was Ross's partner in EDS. Jack Haidt was very friendly with Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson. In fact, he and Nell used to play bridge every Thursday night in the White House. Jack was telling me about this company that was going to go public, EDS. And I said to him, we were having a good time. This event, by the way, I don't know if it still is, put on by the Louisiana delegation to Congress. It's the equivalent of their Mardi Gras ball in Washington. So I said, Jack, is there any, he's telling me all about it. I said, is there any chance I can get an appointment to see if we can get the business? And he said, call me Monday. Now, we'd been drinking quite a bit that night. raising a little bit of hell, having a good time. And I called him Monday morning. He said, you got an appointment Wednesday morning at 11:30. You have 30 minutes. You're to leave exactly at 12 o'clock. I said, okay. He said, by the way, be on time and don't swear. Now, we were having a pretty good time. I'm sure some of the language we used on Saturday night was colorful, although Jack was less of that ilk than I was. And the sad part of the story is I brought 2 kids down with me, 2 Harvard Business School graduates, to make the pitch. Both those boys were burned to death in the Stouffer and the Hilton Inn fire up in Westchester County. Remember, 40-some years ago, a disgruntled employee started the fire, and these fellas were running a company called Arrow Electronics, Duke Glenn and Roger Green. Anyway, so we get scary. Exactly at 11:30, the second hand hits 11:30. The door opens, and we're ushered into Miss Perot's office. Now, he's sitting behind this desk, and he's got these huge ears, and he looked like Kilroy, okay, behind the desk. Hi, fellas. Ross Perot, come on over here. Let's sit and talk a little bit. For 29 and a half minutes, he's telling me all about what Goldman Sachs said, and Merrill Lynch, and White Weld, and Kidder Peabody, and Oppenheimer, you name it. Every firm went down to pitch him. And by the time he was done, there was about 30 seconds left on the clock. So he goes, well, what do you think about what I got to say? And I said, well, Mr. Perot, I said, Jack told me I had 30 minutes and time's up. So maybe next time I come through Dallas, we can talk again. No, forget that. Tell me what you think. I said, well, I'm going to blow the 30-minute rule. And there's only one other rule left, and that's the bad word. And pardon me, ladies, I said, Mr. Perot, that's the biggest pile of horse shit I've ever heard in my life. And he went like that. And he and I talked till 1 o'clock the next morning. We talked 13. We met, and he said to me, give me a call. Talk to you tomorrow. We went back to New York. Matter of fact, we were going back on the afternoon plane. So at 11 o'clock at night, he's driving us around Dallas looking for a drugstore where I could buy a razor and some shaving soap and other stuff. And so the next morning, we took the first flight out. I called him on Friday, and he said to me, I want to think about it. I was going to make my mind up. I'm going to think about it, and I'll let you know. I said, okay. So he said, can you come back down again? I said, yeah, I'd love to come down again. He said, well, would you do me a favor? Would you bring some of those prospecti with you? So I said, sure. One problem was I didn't have any. There was no, I'd never done a deal before in my life, a public offering. So, by the way, this is where your resourcefulness gets groomed when you're a kid and you're selling neckties and stationery and all this other stuff. You learn what you have to do and what you can do. So I go down to see him, and we're talking all about the deal and what happens and so forth. And he had a great company. He had a wonderful company. And he's right. By the way, every time I went to Dallas, he would personally pick me up and he would personally drop me off. It was then Love Field. It was before DFW. And so there's one time that I'm going to bring the prospecti down, which I haven't got. I'm praying to God he's going to forget he asked for him. And so he would drive into the airport, and I think I'm almost home safe. He forgot it. I'll get in the plane, and that'll be the end of it. I opened the door to get out of the car, and he says to me, by the way, you bring those prospecti down? I said, no. Did you forget them? I said, no. I said, there aren't any. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're the first one. And he looked back, and he said, what do you mean? I said, I've never done a deal before, but I know how to get this one done. And, of course, the rest is history. And he and I became the best of friends. It went from business to personal, and all I can tell you is I wish he was elected president in '92. I think things would be a lot different in America today than they are, but that's one man's opinion. I'm sure there are people in this room who would disagree with me, but he was one of a kind.
You got married at the same day, same hour, same...
One of the things in our 13-hour meeting, the first meeting, We found out we were married the same hour, the same day, the same year in different towns. And just a quick part of the Home Depot story. When Bernie and Arthur got fired, I said, I know where to raise the money. So I called up Ross and I agreed to take Bernie and Arthur down with me. And we're having a meeting, and I offered Ross the following deal. Give us $2 million. Bernie and Arthur will take their salary, their medical expense, medical insurance, and to save money, we're going to move the cars they have leased now, their old cars, over to this company. They have 1 year to come up with a plan. If they can't come up with a viable plan, whatever money is left, you get back, Ross. They're out of here. You get 70% of the company, they get 25, and I get 5. Out of their 25, they had to hire people, and so they would be diluted. Ross and I wouldn't be. Wasn't because I was putting the thing together. And I don't know what the hell got in Burroughs' head. He says to Arthur, what kind of car you drive? And Arthur said, I got a 1972 or 71 Pontiac. This is 78. And he says to Bernie, what about you, Bernie? And Bernie says, I have a 1970 Cadillac. Cadillac? My guys don't drive Chevrolets, they drive Cadillacs. They don't drive Cadillacs, they drive Chevrolets. Bernie says to me, can I talk to you for a minute? So I said, yeah, let's go. So I said, Ross, can I use your conference room? He had a guy working for him as a financial advisor who didn't like the deal from day one. So Bernie and Arthur and I go in the conference room. I said, what's up? He said, get me the hell out of here. He says, this guy is going to own 70% of the company. And he's breaking my chops about an 8-year-old car. He said, you imagine a big decision. I said, Bernie, please. I said, let me handle this. So we go back in the room, and I said, Ross, look, Brian, thank God Brian was there. I said, Brian doesn't like this deal. Right, Brian? Well, there's a lot of loose ends. I said, okay, he doesn't like the deal. I said, why don't we cool it for 3 weeks, and we'll see where we are then. So we leave the office, and we're waiting for an elevator to go down. And poor Arthur was terrified. What are we going to do? I got 3 kids. I got no job. I got no insurance. No money coming in. Oh, Bernie was 49, 48. So I said, no problem, fellas. What do you mean? I said, well, we're going to go raise the $2 million. The money's going to get 50%. You're going to get 45%, but that's all you get. You got any people you bring in comes out of that 45%, and I'm getting 5. And Bernie says to me, wait a minute, that's a better deal than we had. I said, Bernie, you don't understand something. In my business, when you can't sell something, you mark it up. In your business, when you can't sell something, you mark it down. And that's what we did. We raised $2 million. We spent 9 months studying America. We picked Atlanta as where we wanted to go. We knew what we wanted to do. We were, the 3 of us were fully committed to one thing and one thing alone. That the most important part of this company is and always would be the kids on the floor that wear the apron. They're the people where you make your goodwill. They're the people where you build your business. They're the people that put up with the customers that are tough to deal with. They're the people that take care of people that want to come back. And I think, and I'll just give you a little human interest story. North Lake Boulevard store. I got a picture on my phone. The greeter in that store just died. He was 102 years old. His name was Carmen Yanada. I went to the wake 2 weeks ago. And I'll tell you a sad thing. He stopped working just before he was 100 because the VA wouldn't give him benefits if he still had a job. So he was encouraged to give up his job so he could get benefits. Something's wrong.
Two questions.
Yeah.
How many millionaires do you think were created?
I'll tell you exactly the number. This is the proudest number of all. We have 3,000 kids. I call them kids. I tell them, if you're lower than 90, you're a kid, okay? So don't get angry. We have 3,000 kids that started pushing in carts in the parking lot that are still with the company today, and they're multimillionaires. All of them started when they were 18 years old or younger. And that was our dream of what we wanted. We wanted our people to own the business. We wanted our people to feel it was theirs. And we changed the tagline on aprons. This one is, I'm a Home Depot stockholder. What can I do to help you? On his apron, printed on the apron. And a guy walked in one day and he said, in the electrical department, he said, young man, excuse me, is this your department? And the kid says to him, no, sir, I own the whole store. What can I do to help you? It got through. It got through. And that's the key. That is the key. And I'm very proud of, we're almost to 500,000 now, John.
And
we're in Guam, and we're in the Virgin Islands, and we're in Puerto Rico. You didn't mention where we were in those. Okay. But we have a wonderful company, and we have wonderful people.
that $2 million that Perot did not put in, what would that have turned into?
Probably, well, I'll tell you what, I'll get it back in. One night we were celebrating, we used to celebrate our anniversary 1 year in New York and the next year in Dallas, back and forth. He and Margot and Elaine and I. And back then, his share, the 70% minus dilution, would have been about $18 billion. He was saying, how those two boys do it? You brought in about wanting to start a hardware store. And I said, pretty good. How'd they do? I said, Forbes says you're worth $3 billion and you're number 17 or 19, whatever he was on the list. I said, if you had done the deal, you'd be probably number one, and your net worth would be over $20 billion. John, it's a rough number, but I'm going to guess it'd be $60 billion now. And I'll give you an interesting statistic. We went public in September of 1981. Apple went public in December of 80, 9 months before us. From the time Apple went public, counting dividends till now, till last August, I had the kid in my office do it. From the time we went public, Apple went public till then, they compounded at 17% a year. From the time we went public, 9 months later, counting dividends, we compounded at 28% a year. We're the number one, from the time we went public, we're the number one performing stock in the S&P. Amazing, isn't that? By the way, there's an original shareholder here in the room. Where's Chris Kentner? There she is. You want to know why she's living so well? Because she owns stock at nothing a share, right? By the way, get to know them. Chris, honest to God, Chris and I were in business almost 30 years. Nobody like her. And her husband, David, they're wonderful people, and I'm so happy to know they're in Palm Beach. They're really good folks, and she's smarter than a whip. She's what they call wicked smart. She's really smart. And she was my partner. She's done very well, and I've been blessed to have her as a partner. Thanks, Chris, for everything. Okay?
I want to ask you about one.
And we won't hold a charity for her, I can tell you right now.
I want to ask you about one more deal
Yeah.
that did pretty well. IVAC,
Yep,
a little medical device company. Can you just walk us through that?
sure. IVAC was a company that they invented the first electronic thermometers for temperature taking. And in 1969, I had a hot hand. We had just done EDS, and we were doing deals. And by the way, we went from one deal to any number of deals. And a guy came in to see me, California bronze. I mean, this guy was straight out of GQ in California, handsome, smooth as silk. I mean, the guy had it all on. He persuaded me to go out and raise $5 million for 10% of the company. And I knew we were in trouble when one day he called me and wanted to know if I can come. They were based in San Diego. Could I come out to San Diego and see him? And I said, sure. He takes me, downtown San Diego was all parking lots then. He points to this piece of land and he said, you see that? I said, yeah. He says, that's where we're going to build IVAC's world headquarters. I said, oh my God. I said, Dick, don't you think it'd be good if we had some sales first before we talked about it? Anyway, he went through the $5 million. And one of the investors of the $5 million was U.S. Trust Company. And they called me and said, we got a mess on our hands in this company. You put us into this thing. You figure out how to get us out. What do I do? We started the proxy fight, and we won. This company had never had a public offering. But this guy would go to Vegas, and he'd go around the back where the band was, and he'd take out the thermometer, and he'd have a stack of stock sheets, of stock certificates, and he'd be selling stock for $1 a share to these guys that played the trombone and so he went through that. We started the proxy fight. We won. This was 1974, 72. And I got control of the company on a Wednesday with $30,000 in the bank. And the payroll was due on Friday for $50,000. We were $20,000 short in 48 hours. And I went to see the banker. And I reminded him of some of the things that wouldn't look good on his resume if it ever got out. I mean, I'm not going to call it extortion, but it was whatever you want to call
Persuasion.
it. It worked.
Persuasion.
It worked, okay? I got the money. So, and I commuted to San Diego every Thursday night. I'd leave my office at 80 Pine at 3:30, get to the plant at 9 o'clock California time, work till midnight, go back down to, it was in La Jolla, go back down to San Diego, get up 4:30, 5 o'clock, go up to the plant, work till noon, get a PSA flight to LA and get American Flight 4 from LA to New York. And I did that for almost 2 years. And by then they'd also invented the infusion pump. Before that, when you got IV, they just turned the bottle upside down and counted the drops. This was a box that hung on a pole that had a tube going through it. The controller was one that controlled the gravity flow. The pump was the one pump that pushed it in. It took off, and we turned it around. And in 1977, Eli Lilly bought the company from us. And believe it or not, Lilly's total sales when we did the deal was $2 billion a year. And they had total market cap of $2.5 billion, Eli Lilly. They gave us 2.5% of Lilly for IVAC. I've never sold one share of Eli Lilly. It's worked out pretty well. I'm a long-term investor.
So going to that and thinking about today, you have CNBC, you have the internet, you have information flow. It's harder to find sort of the undiscovered gems. When you're talking to younger people who are trying to get into investing now and thinking about long term, and you also talk about Moore's Law with technology evolving so fast, how has your investment approach taken that into consideration, and what advice do you give to people about, how do you be long term? It's a very different world, and how have you changed your investing?
Actually, it's not a different world. It's a different way of approaching the same world. And let me tell you what I mean. One of the great lessons I got in life, and a tool that's been of enormous benefit to me, was when I was a caddy at Wheelie Hills Golf Club out in Long Island. I could tell, but after 5 or 6 rounds of caddying, I could tell you about the personality of the guy I'm caddying for. The guy that would blame me for the bad shot he made, or the guy that I learned to develop a knack for reading people. And John, my whole investment style is simple. I want to meet the people, I want to get to know them, and I'll make my mind up if I want to invest with them. Everything I think about that I've done has always evolved around great people. Bernie and Arthur, Ross Perot, you and your father. I go right down the list. It's always about the people. And the second thing I bring to the party is I'm long-term. How many years are you my partner? 28 years? 30 years? Long time, I can tell you right now. I show it, you don't, okay? My secretary's with me 35 years. My driver's with me 35 years. My wife is going to be my wife for 70 years in September, okay? So what I'm saying is my whole point of view is long-term. And I think I have a much better chance of picking a winner over the long term than I do over the short term. I'm proud of the fact of the way we do business. I really am proud. In fact, I'm thinking of all of my major positions. A young one is Parker Hannifin. I own it 16 years now. J.P. Morgan. We got into that in 2008 when they had the warrants, the top warrants, and we bought the top warrants. So that's almost 18 years. Yum Brands, I was an original board member when they spun out of Pepsi, and that's about 18 years now, 19 years. Home Depot is 48 years. I never sold a share of Depot. I've given it to charity, but I've never sold any. And Lilly is November 30th, 1977, since that day. And I try to look beyond an event. And that's how I invest my money. You know?
And I've learned a lot because that was also Ira's big thing. And so one of the things that we do is before we invest with somebody, we check their Uber rating. And so when people take Ubers, they get rated by the drivers. Mm-hmm. And we've found people that we were looking at their investment and they had a very low rating, and we immediately passed. So it's something that I thank you for that.
By the way, speaking of Ira, Nikki and Ira and Elaine and I have traversed the world twice. We never had a crossword. We never had a stressful moment. It was when we had a real anxious moment when my brand new airplane was taking off from Palm Beach nonstop to Hawaii, and the damn turkey buzzard got sucked into the engine. And I had to borrow John Henry's old G4 to get us to Arizona. We ended up going to New Zealand in an old G4 with the Boston Red Sox on the tail of the plane. I hate the Red Sox, by the way. Go ahead. But I mean it, Nikki. Those are great memories.
Well, just talking about evaluating people, you know, that somebody used to famously say that the last winning presidential pick you had was when you selected Dewey
Now, your father
over
used
Truman.
to tell me that, right?
Can you just take your crystal ball and looking at today's world, what do you see out? How do you think about politics? Do you have a pick for 28, for 32? Anybody you like?
Let me begin by saying there's absolutely nothing I like about Donald Trump's style. But I want to tell you something right now. Thank God he's our president. You know, there's an old saying, you want to be president so you can say you're president, or you want to be president to get something done. Like it or not, David Boies had a column in the New York Post last Saturday. I urge you get it. And David Boies is a raging liberal. And he's the last guy I would expect to write this story. Read what he wrote. We were headed for an enormous crisis. These guys were going to get the bomb and they were going to use it. They were going to use it. Now, as I said, why can't he do things a little different? You know, why does he have to say to NATO, if we didn't come in and help you guys, you'd all be speaking German today? I mean, you know, that's how to insult everybody all at once. But push that all aside. The guy's energy level, God bless him, the guy's ability to get things, Venezuela's turning out to be the right thing for us. And look at where Cuba is today. Everybody's tried, going back to Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs. You go to Cuba today, it's heartbreaking. A new car is a 1953 car in Cuba. Nothing works. There's no air conditioning. These people are starving. People in Venezuela were starving. Everybody, and I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans, and I am a very conservative Republican. But George Bush did nothing. The last guy that would have done something would have been Ronald Reagan, in my opinion. Okay, this is all my opinion. But I'll tell you right now, give this guy credit, and maybe he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, but he's doing the right thing. But seriously, give him credit. We had to take this on, and the longer we waited, the riskier it would become. So that's, now how do I feel about politicians? I'm sure there's some politicians in the room. I wish they were a little bit more schooled in what they're supposed to know about. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is, I don't know why anybody would ever want to go into public service. It's a thankless job and tough. I put this American flag pin. I have two pins. I got the American flag pin, and I have the, I know we're almost done, and I have this blue square that Robert Kraft gave me. I wear both of them. They both have a purpose. I look, when I put the American flag on, I look at the ceiling and I say, Grandma and Grandpa, thanks for coming to America. There'll never be another America ever again. You want to knock it, but I'll tell you right now, go any place you want in the world, this is where you want to be. Everybody wants to be here. That's one. And number two, that blue thing, we have to stop hate. We have to stop it. We're better than that, all of us. Okay?
I know that I have about 35 more questions, and we could go on for hours. So maybe we'll do it at Elios on Meatball Night.
Oh, will you?
Why don't we open it up for questions? Does anyone have a question for Ken or for John? Yes, in the back, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of those people you met with, Ross Perot, incredible man.
Wonderful
What you've done
man.
is incredible. But one thing you haven't mentioned, a very important question, is you're getting your position in Eli Lilly. And you're very involved in healthcare and generous.
Yes.
And you believe in research and development.
Yep.
And why have you been a long-term investor in Eli Lilly? And tell us about your philanthropy, which I think is more important than politics, quite frankly.
I agree.
In what you've done for the universities in research and development.
Okay.
And also a comment, please have the government take away attacking research and development, and let's get going.
I said publicly, the one big mistake Trump is making, huge mistake, is messing around with the NIH. The NIH is probably one of the greatest assets this country has. The good that's come out of the NIH, the discovery that's come out of the NIH is like nothing you've ever seen. So that's my position on that. Lilly. I started out with Lilly, and I was the bad guy because I owned 52% of the stock. And they had a deal with me, and the guy that's a great story, the guy that was negotiating for Lilly, a fellow by the name of Gene Stepp, wonderful man, and he and I, we started out as adversaries. He and I became the closest of friends. And so anyway, we're in a room out in L.A. in Gibson Dunn, and he said, young man, Eli Lilly is prepared to offer you 95/100ths of a share of Lilly for every share of IVAC. And I said, Mr. Stepp, I know and you know, if you got 95/100ths of a share in your pocket, there's an 05 hanging around someplace. So call it share for share. He said, young man, our offer is 95/100ths of a share. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, I'm shutting my briefcase. I'm going out to our plane. I'm taking off. I'm going back to Indianapolis, and I never want to hear about this company again. I said, Mr. Stepp, you got a deal. And why have I held it? Through all the lean years, I never saw this company do anything that I wouldn't be proud of. The people and the company. And that's consistent with my point of view on people and the importance of people. And I became very, very close. I hung in with them through the thin days. The salad days are here now. By the way, these drugs are miracle drugs. These Ozempic, not Ozempic,
GLP.
Mounjaro and Zepbound. These are miracle drugs. We now know, for example, they have an impact on alcoholism, heart trouble. It's incredible. They have the leading position. I'm not pitching you about Lilly, but I am. They have the leading position They're spending $40 billion this year to build plants to manufacture the ingredients that go into these drugs. The market is enormous. And I hope they keep lowering the price, because the more they lower the price, the more difficult it is for a competitor to come in, and more importantly, it broadens your market. And I think they're just a fabulous company. Now, philanthropy. You know, you do well by doing good. A dear friend of mine, very close to the Harrises, Marty Lipton. Marty Lipton's a great, great corporate lawyer in New York. Called me up one day and said he needed to come see me. He had a problem. Now, every time I've gotten myself in a tight spot, get Marty on the phone. So he comes over to see me with J.O. Lever, the president of NYU. He said, we got a mess on our hands. I thought he was talking about the business school, which was doing great. We got a mess on our hands. I said, Marty, I said, Stern's doing fabulous. What are you talking about, a mess? Because that's where I went. You know, I'm not talking about the medical, Stern. I'm talking about the medical school. I said, does NYU have a medical school? I didn't even know it had a medical school. Honest to God. So he's told me all about it. I said, Marty, I'll take 3 months to think about it. And I did take 3 months. And I'll tell you what the tipping point for me, it was a mess. You can't believe what a mess. Every place you look, something needed to be fixed. We were forced into a merger, and they were forced into a merger. Mount Sinai and NYU merged their hospitals. They hated us, and we hated them. It was a merger from hell. Is that a fair statement? I want you on the board of Mount Sinai? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's better. Okay. By the way, I should get some credit for Mrs. Gottesman giving us free education. Anyway, so I had a friend of mine out in Long Island, a great surgeon by the name of John Mountain, and he was a very close friend of a fellow by the name of Frank Spencer. The truth be known, Frank Spencer was truly the pioneer of open heart surgery. And not DeBakey and not Barnard in Africa. Frank Spencer was the guy that, if you want any proof, there's a fellow with a great doctor in New York, Wayne Isom. He trained under Frank. Go ask Wayne about Frank Spencer. Now, here's what I knew about Frank Spencer, which told me, if he told me to walk through that window, I'd walk through the window. He was a Navy captain in the Korean War, and he was assigned to a MASH unit. Remember the television show MASH, the field hospital? And the Surgeon General of the United States issued an edict that if kids were brought in badly wounded, legs or arms, don't try to save them, amputate the limb. One day, a kid is wheeled into Frank's tent, and Frank looks at the kid's legs, badly, badly wounded, and he looks at him and he says, I can fix those legs. I'm not going to cut them off. He did the operation, successful. The word gets up to Washington that a direct order was violated, which is a no-no in the military. And Frank got called in and was told he was going to be court-martialed for violating a direct order. Now they have discovery, and the Army lawyer says to Frank, are you aware, sir, that you violated a direct order? He said, yes, I am. And he said, I'd do it again. And he said, what do you mean? He says, I thought when I saw those legs, I don't care how much time you put me in the stockade, every day will be a day I'm willing to pay, knowing there's a kid walking around in his own legs in his hometown. They dropped the charges, and they gave Frank a medal. And he was one of a kind. I met with him, and he said, Ken, I'll just tell you one thing. Every place you look in this place, something needs to be fixed. It's a mess. But he said, we've got the greatest doctors practicing the greatest medicine in the world in this place. And I said, thank you. I called Marty. I said, I'll do it. And I said, Marty, this is public, so I'm not. I said, Marty, I went home and I told Elaine, I said, I think we ought to do this. And I said, I think, but I want people to know I'm going to put our money where our mouth is. What do you mean? I said, I think we ought to give them $100 million. And Her first question was, do we have that kind of money? I said, yeah, I think we can handle it, okay? And we announced that I was doing it, and I put $100 million up. And it was actually a commitment for 200, which we then put the second 100 up. And part of the deal was I had the right to name the medical center. I never wanted our name on it. 7 years later, when Bob Grossman became dean, the name still wasn't on it. 8 years. They called me up and said to me, if you'll allow us to put your name on this thing, it'll inspire other people to want to help. From when we started, you ready? We've raised $5.5 billion for the medical center. And it's the most, of all the deals I've done, there's nothing that's given me more joy and more satisfaction. It's the most expensive thing I've ever done too, by the way. But there's nothing that's given my wife and me more satisfaction and more joy. And by the way, wait till you see what's coming to Palm Beach next fall. Wait till you see this facility we're building down here. I walked it day before yesterday. It's going to blow you away. I'm telling you. Trust me, it's something.
Well, make sure to watch the 60 Minutes piece about the gift where it became tuition free. It's one of the most moving pieces and impactful pieces that you'll see.
A quick ending to that. One of our trustees is Trudy Gottesman. Trudy Gottesman's father-in-law was Sandy Gottesman, who was one of Warren Buffett's original investors. 3 years ago, Trudy Gottesman said to me she'd like to bring her mother-in-law, Ruth Gottesman, in to see me. And I said, what about? She wants to talk to you about what you did at NYU. Elaine and I were the lead gift for free tuition. And that, by the way, that's a game changer. Absolute game changer. And we do it, by the way, not need-based. If a kid understand what these kids go through to become doctors is an enormous sacrifice. I don't care if the old man's a zillionaire. By the way, if the old man's got that kind of money, I'll go see him later on. But yeah, I certainly have an introduction for sure, okay? But anyway, so she comes in to see me and she said, tell me about how you and your wife feel now about what you've done. I said, nothing has given my career more of a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment than that. I said, all the other things that came our way, they're all nice, but this thing really puts a sense of purpose in our life. She said, well, I just want you to know that on Monday, this is on Friday, on Monday we're going to announce she gave $1 billion in Berkshire Hathaway stock to Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein School is 100% tuition free. So our deal is having babies. All right.
All right, and one more question, the final question, please.
Given the demise of big box stores and department stores, what do you credit the longevity in Home Depot?
The kids with the orange aprons. That's it. The kids with the orange aprons. I got a screw. I don't know what I need or how I need it. The kids just follow me. Look, it's always about the people. You go to a Home Depot store, you could easily get lost. And it's complicated. These kids that I call, as I said, anybody under 90 is a kid. These kids are passionate. We can't measure this asset. We got 500,000 of them. One's better. I can tell you stories of what these kids do apart from their activity in the store as human beings. We encourage them to do that. We encourage them to reach, to show the people in the store, the customers, that we're grateful that they come to our store. That's an experience. And you know, Sam Walton did it. Jim Setterglage did it at Costco. To me, one of the great experiences in life is going to Costco to see what kind of samples they got all around. I mean, I'm serious. What better way to spend a rainy day in Palm Beach than to go to the Costco on North Lake Boulevard?
Well, I think we might all be heading there next, perhaps. So, Listen, Ken and John, we thank you so much. On behalf of the Civic Association members and directors, what a wonderful program. And we have gifts for you both today. And we also thank Northern Trust, to Chris Storkerson, Cheryl Culp, and the Northern Trust team. We thank you so much for sponsoring today's program. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again.